Pewter City rested quietly at the edge of the mountains, where the stone met the morning mist and the air carried the scent of minerals and pine. The world here moved slowly, shaped by patience and time. The rocks themselves seemed alive, ancient guardians that stood watch over generations who had learned to live in rhythm with the land. Within this tranquil place lived a boy named Brock. From his earliest memories, he felt a connection to the earth beneath his feet. While others played in open fields or chased the fleeting shimmer of rare Pokémon, Brock found comfort in the solidity of stone. To him, the mountains were not lifeless. They were steady, reliable, and full of quiet strength. Brock's days began early, before the city stirred awake. He would step outside, his small hands brushing against the rough stone of his family's home, feeling its texture, cold yet comforting. He would watch the sunrise stretch across the cliffs, painting the rocks in soft amber light. The silence of morning became his first teacher. It taught him stillness, awareness, and the value of patience. His family was large, and responsibility came early. His parents, once full of dreams and adventure, had grown weary of the endless journeying that trainers so often pursued. In their absence, Brock became more than a brother. He became a caretaker, a guide, a foundation. He prepared meals, fixed what was broken, and ensured his younger siblings faced each day with warmth and care. The house, though humble, was filled with life. The laughter of children, the crackle of cooking fires, the sounds of Pokémon resting peacefully outside. Yet beneath it all was the quiet pressure that Brock carried in his heart. He had learned that love was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was expressed through constancy, through showing up each morning ready to give. Outside, Pewter City existed in harmony with its rocky terrain. The gym stood at its center, a monument of stone and discipline. Brock admired it long before he was old enough to step inside. He would stand at the base of the arena walls, running his fingers along the granite, imagining the echoes of battles past. There was a kind of beauty in the weight of it all, in the stillness before each clash. His fascination with rock-type Pokémon grew naturally from this environment. Geodude, Onix, and the others seemed to embody everything he respected: resilience, endurance, and quiet strength. He studied them with care, not as tools for battle, but as beings with rhythm and personality, each one shaped by the land from which it came. Over time, Brock's understanding deepened. He began to see himself in his Pokémon, steady, patient, and unwavering. The way they endured hardship mirrored the way he faced his own responsibilities. Each challenge only refined them further, polishing the rough edges like stone under the slow pressure of time. When Pewter City slept, Brock would often walk the Shieber, outskirts alone. The stars shimmered faintly above the peaks, and the distant hum of the wind filled the night. In these moments, he felt connected to something larger, the unspoken wisdom of the world itself. The rocks around him whispered lessons of endurance, of remaining grounded no matter how strong the storm. Though young, Brock understood something profound: that true strength was not about power, but about balance. Between duty and passion, between ambition and care, between the world's weight and the heart's capacity to carry it. He would one day become a gym leader, a mentor, and a friend to countless trainers. But for now, in the quiet heart of Pewter City, he was simply Brock, a boy learning to listen to the silence, to draw strength from stone, and to nurture those who depended on him. The mountains, ancient and immovable, stood as silent witnesses to his journey's beginning, and within their shadow, a young heart of stone began to beat with kindness. In Pewter City, the days unfolded with the patience of stone. The rhythm of life was measured not by urgency, but by endurance, a steady passage marked by quiet work, slow growth, and silent care. Among the soft hum of the city's waking hours, Brock moved with deliberate purpose, a presence both strong and gentle. Shaped by responsibility, he had grown older, though not by many years, yet his shoulders already carried more than most adults could bear. The morning began with sound, the creak of wooden floors beneath his careful steps, the rustle of blankets as his younger siblings stirred. the faint bubbling of a kettle as water warmed on the stove. Every motion was familiar, a ritual performed so often that it had become instinct. Responsibility had not arrived all at once. It had settled upon him slowly, like dust upon rock, unnoticed at first, then inseparable from his being. When his parents' absence became a pattern rather than an exception, Brock had simply begun doing what needed to be done. No one had asked. He had not complained. The quiet weight of duty had simply chosen him. He cooked, he cleaned, he soothed fears in the night. He tended to the smaller ones who missed their parents and wiped away tears when they asked questions he could not answer. In every gesture, he built a foundation of stability, ensuring that the household stood firm despite the fractures left behind. Outside, the world continued. Trainers came and went. Battles echoed through the gym. The mountains glowed with the color of dawn, yet Brock's focus remained within. He became the center of that small world, its unshakable core. Each morning, before heading to his gym duties, he would kneel to check on his siblings' Pokémon, patching a scrape here, mending a small nest there. His Pokémon, too, learned from his sense of calm. Geodude waited patiently near the doorway each morning, ready to assist, while Onyx rested further outside, coiled along the rocky ridge that overlooked the city. Even the wild Pokémon nearby seemed to understand his rhythm, approaching without fear. Through these routines, Brock developed a profound empathy, an understanding that strength was not about dominance, but about care. The same hands that could guide a battle with precision could also cradle a crying child, or gently tend to a wounded Pokémon. He found beauty in this duality, the fusion of power and tenderness, of stone and heart. Yet, beneath the serenity of his demeanor, fatigue occasionally whispered. There were nights when exhaustion settled deep within his bones, when he longed for rest or freedom, for the carefree adventures he had heard other trainers speak of. But even in those moments, he never faltered. The faces that depended on him, the lives he nurtured, they anchored him, grounding him as surely as the bedrock beneath Pewter City. The world outside seemed far away. Sometimes, he would glance at the travelers who passed through, trainers bright, with ambition, carrying dreams of badges, leagues, and championships. Their excitement stirred something in him, a flicker of curiosity and longing. But each time, he returned to his duties, knowing that his path, for now, was here. The gym itself was both his refuge and his challenge. The stone walls held echoes of past battles, and within them, Brock honed his philosophy of strength. For him, a gym battle was not a contest of might, but a lesson in patience and understanding. He observed his challengers closely, how they treated their Pokémon, how they handled defeat, how they balanced ambition with respect. He admired trainers who listened to their Pokémon, who fought not for glory but for growth. These were the ones he encouraged most, speaking quietly after the match, offering advice that went beyond tactics. He told them to pay attention to the small things, the rhythm of their partner's breathing, the tone of their cries, the subtle changes in their energy. In those lessons, Brock shared a fragment of his own worldview, that strength without compassion was hollow, and that victory meant nothing if it came at the cost of understanding. Many left Pewter City changed, carrying his quiet wisdom long after their battles had ended. At times, between matches, Brock would retreat to the cliffs that bordered the city. There, surrounded by ancient stone, he found solace. The vast silence of the mountains reminded him that endurance was its own form of grace. He would sit for hours, watching the wind carve lines across the rock faces, thinking of how time itself shaped everything: people, Pokémon, even the hardest surfaces. In these moments, he allowed himself to feel the quiet ache of solitude. Responsibility had given him purpose, but it had also isolated him. His life was woven entirely from the needs of others, his siblings, his challengers, his Pokémon. He rarely had time to consider his own dreams. Yet even this, he accepted without resentment. He believed that one day, when his younger siblings were grown and strong, when the household could stand without his constant care, he might find his own path again. Until then, he was content to wait. Like the stones he admired, he would endure. Evening brought stillness once more. The city's lights dimmed, and the air cooled as the last hues of sunset faded into shadow. Inside the house, the younger ones slept soundly. Brock moved quietly through the rooms, checking windows, tidying small things left scattered through the day. His movements were gentle, unhurried. When all was still, he would step outside again, finding his way to Onyx's resting place. The great Pokémon lifted its head, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Brock would rest his hand upon the stone hide, feeling the pulse of life beneath the surface, slow, steady, eternal. He often spoke softly then, though not in words meant to be heard. His thoughts flowed like a quiet stream, gratitude for the day, reflection on his duties, and the faint hope for what might come. Onyx listened, unmoving, its presence vast and comforting. In that silent exchange, Brock found peace. The night around them deepened, filled with the quiet hum of distant life, the faint sound of cricketot in the trees, the whisper of wind across the peaks. It was a world of stillness, but not emptiness. Beneath the quiet, everything thrummed with subtle purpose, and Brock, standing among the stone and shadow, understood his place within it. He was a part of the mountain, steadfast, patient, unyielding, yet filled with a quiet compassion that shaped the lives around him. The weight he carried was not a burden, but a calling, the manifestation of his strength. As the stars shimmered faintly above Pewter City, he closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of the earth lull him into calm. Tomorrow would come with the same responsibilities, the same routines, the same steady flow of life. And he would meet it, as always, with quiet endurance. For in the stillness of duty, in the unspoken bonds of care, Brock found something eternal, a truth as solid and enduring as the stone itself. That strength, at its deepest, is the capacity to bear the weight of others with gentleness. Pewter City was a place shaped not by haste, but by endurance. Its streets curved through slopes of gray and silver stone, and its buildings seemed to grow naturally from the earth, as if carved by time rather than built by hands. The people there spoke softly, their voices blending with the sound of wind moving between the cliffs. Everything in Pewter breathed the same rhythm, slow, steady, and resilient. For Brock, this rhythm had become the pulse of his own life. Every morning began before dawn. The mountain air was cool and dry, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and minerals. He would stand outside the Pewter gym, eyes closed, listening not for sound, but for silence. That silence was his companion, a teacher that never failed him. The gym was more than a building to him. It was a living symbol of responsibility, of tradition, of strength born from patience. Each stone in its walls held a memory of past battles, of countless trainers who had stood before him seeking progress, proof, or purpose. Brock had come to understand that his duty extended beyond testing others. It was to teach them the philosophy of the stone, that power without control crumbles, that perseverance is greater than speed, and that understanding one's foundation is the truest form of strength. He had not chosen this path for glory. It had chosen him through circumstance, through necessity, through the quiet pull of destiny that wove itself into his every act of care. When his parents had gone, the gym had been left in disarray, its routines disrupted, its purpose fading. Brock had rebuilt it, piece by piece, stone by stone, restoring its weight and dignity. Each challenge that arrived at the doors of the Pewter gym brought something new. Some trainers came eager, faces bright with confidence, unaware of the depth of patience required to master true strength. Others came timid, seeking reassurance more than victory. Brock met them all with the same calm steadiness. He did not rush battles, he observed. He did not dominate, he guided. Geodude was often his first partner in these encounters, small, rugged, yet enduring. Together, they demonstrated resilience, showing challengers that victory came not through overwhelming power, but through understanding and persistence. Then came Onyx, towering and ancient, the embodiment of unyielding will. Its movements, though deliberate and heavy, carried grace. Watching Onyx fight was like watching the mountain itself come alive. Through these battles, Brock began to see that every encounter was an exchange of philosophy. The trainers who fought him did not merely face stone, they faced themselves. Their impatience was reflected in their Pokémon's movements, their fear in hesitation, their arrogance in overreach. Brock watched, studied, and offered quiet insight when the battle ended, not as criticism, but as reflection. "Observe your foundation," he would often say, though softly, sometimes only to himself. For every trainer, the foundation was different. Courage, loyalty, empathy, curiosity. Those who understood it grew stronger. Those who ignored it eventually faltered. Outside of battle, Brock's life remained simple. His siblings continued to grow, their laughter filling the spaces of the home that had once echoed with emptiness. Each one found their own rhythm under his guidance, tending to small chores, helping with Pokémon care, or assisting in the gym when visitors arrived. Brock watched them with quiet pride. The weight he carried now felt lighter, distributed across hands he had taught to be strong. Even in solitude, he found meaning. At dusk, when the last challenger had left and the gym stood empty, Brock would sit upon the arena's edge, watching the dust settle in beams of fading light. The air carried warmth from the battles fought earlier, yet it was calm, a stillness after motion, a silence after sound. In those moments, he often thought of what it meant to live a life of endurance. He had begun to realize that his bond with rock-type Pokémon went beyond strategy or skill. It was a reflection of his own nature, steady, deliberate, enduring through time and pressure. He felt a kinship with the land itself, understanding how erosion shaped stone not through force, but through persistence. Every mark on a rock told a story of time and endurance. So too did every scar, every memory, every quiet victory in his own life. Though many saw him only as the first gym leader on a long journey, Brock never resented his place in the order. He understood that beginnings were sacred. Every journey started with a first step, and he had the honor of guiding trainers through theirs. To inspire them at their foundation was a gift, one that he cherished with the humility of stone. The Pewter gym was a sanctuary. Trainers came to test themselves, but often left with something else: a quiet sense of self-awareness. Brock never raised his voice, never mocked defeat. He believed that loss was not failure, but instruction. The look in a challenger's eyes when they realized that truth, that was what made every battle worthwhile. Yet not every lesson was meant for others. Some were for himself. There were nights when the silence of the mountains pressed upon him with weight. He would walk alone, the path lit by faint moonlight reflected on silver rock. The sound of Onyx moving slowly through the distance echoed softly, a reminder of companionship and constancy. Brock would pause, looking at his own reflection in a still pool of water formed between stones. In that reflection, he saw both the boy he had been and the man he was becoming, still learning, still growing. Responsibility had shaped him, but it had not hardened him. Instead, it had refined his gentleness. He had come to see that strength without empathy was as brittle as rock, left untempered by the elements. True endurance was not the absence of feeling, but the balance of it, the ability to bear the weight of others without losing one's humanity. He began keeping a small journal beside his bed, writing thoughts that surfaced after long days. Not battles, not victories, but reflections, fragments of insight about life, about his Pokémon, about the nature of strength. "Stone remembers," one entry read. "Not every mark is a wound. Some are lessons." These writings, though private, became his meditation. Each word helped him understand himself, anchoring his thoughts the same way the earth anchors the mountain. As weeks turned to months, Brock's reputation spread quietly beyond Pewter City. Not because of the difficulty of his battles, but because of the calm he carried. Trainers spoke of how the Pewter gym felt different, quieter, more introspective. Some even said they left with more questions than they arrived with. but better questions, the kind that led to growth. And still, through all of it, Brock remained the same. He cared for his siblings, trained his Pokémon, and kept the gym in harmony. He was not a hero in the grand tales of trainers who conquered leagues or caught legends, but he was a pillar, steady, grounded, and essential. He knew that one day he might leave Pewter City, perhaps to see the wider world, to learn from others, to discover what lay beyond the horizon of the mountains. But for now, he stayed. He stayed because the mountain had taught him the value of time, that rushing toward something often meant losing sight of what was already there. Night returned again. The stars shimmered faintly above the peaks, reflecting off the pale stone and casting faint silver light over the gym. Brock sat outside, surrounded by the calm of his home. Geodude floated beside him, content. Onyx rested further away, its form blending into the darkness like part of the mountain itself. He placed his hand upon the ground, feeling the faint hum of the earth beneath his palm. It was steady, the same heartbeat he had felt since childhood, the same rhythm that guided him still. In that stillness, Brock understood the truth of his path. That strength was not about how much one could take, but how gently one could hold. That even the hardest stone was shaped by the soft persistence of time, and that the truest calling of those who bear weight is not to stand above others, but to support them, quietly, faithfully, endlessly. The night grew colder, but the warmth within him remained constant. Brock closed his eyes, listening to the silence of Pewter City, the silence that had always been his greatest teacher. And as dawn prepared once more to rise over the gray ridges of stone, he smiled faintly, for he knew that, like the mountains, his purpose was not to move, but to endure. The sun rose slowly over Pewter City, brushing the peaks of the mountains with pale gold. The morning air was cool and still, carrying a sense of quiet before the start of another day. Brock stood at the doorway of the gym, watching as faint light filtered through the mist that clung to the rocky slopes. It was a morning like countless others, calm, deliberate, unchanged. Yet within that calm, a whisper of restlessness had begun to stir in him. For years, he had stood as the guardian of Pewter's first challenge, the unyielding gatekeeper to the League's path. He had guided, taught, and tested, his days structured by routine and duty. And though peace reigned in that life, there was a part of him that had begun to wonder what lay beyond the horizon, the places his challengers came from, the faces they spoke of, the world beyond the mountain's reach. He did not dwell on it often. Discipline had taught him to master the pull of impulse. Yet sometimes, when night settled and the city lay silent beneath the stars, his thoughts would wander to distant roads and unseen skies. That morning, as he tended to his Pokémon, a faint tremor of anticipation touched him. The earth itself seemed to hum, as though something unseen approached. And then, before long, that something arrived. It was a young trainer, a boy no older than many who had stood before him, yet with a kind of determination that seemed to move before him like a current. His clothes were dusty from travel, his eyes bright with curiosity and ambition. There was something pure about that energy, unshaped and untested. Brock watched him from across the field as the boy stepped into the gym with a sense of awe. He introduced himself, his voice quick but uncertain, his hand gripping a Pokeball with a mixture of pride and nervousness. Brock nodded, recognizing in him what he had seen in many before, a spark, fragile but genuine, the kind that, if guided well, could grow into something far greater. The boy's name was Ash. Their battle began, as the others had, with calm instruction and quiet focus. Brock chose Geodude first, the steady companion of countless challenges. Ash responded with energy, his voice carrying enthusiasm even as inexperience showed through his movements. The match unfolded like a dialogue between two philosophies, one of youthful fire, the other of tempered patience. Geodude moved with purpose, conserving strength, countering with precision. Ash's Pokémon, small, eager, determined, struggled to adapt to the weight of endurance that the Pewter gym demanded. The boy's frustration grew, but so too did his resolve. Brock watched him carefully. He had seen this before. The moment when ambition met its first real obstacle. Some faltered there, giving in to defeat. Others grew frustrated, blaming the challenge instead of themselves. But sometimes, rarely, a trainer would pause, reflect, and grow before his eyes. Ash, in his own clumsy way, did just that. After a difficult start, he began to watch more, think more, feel more. He adjusted his rhythm, learned from his own mistakes within the space of moments. Brock saw the change take root, the quiet spark of understanding. Faint, but undeniable. When the battle ended, Brock stood quietly for a long time. He looked at the boy not as a challenger, but as a reflection of something he had once been. The same hunger to understand, the same need to prove, the same restless heart yearning to move beyond familiar stone. He handed Ash the boulder badge, not out of pity, but respect. He saw, beneath the boy's impatience, a rare spirit, the kind that could grow stronger without losing kindness. Yet that meeting did more than test the young trainer. It awakened something within Brock himself. For the first time in many years, the idea of leaving Pewter City no longer felt like a distant dream. It felt possible, perhaps even necessary. Watching Ash depart, speaking of future battles and unexplored lands, Brock felt a quiet stirring within his chest. A pull not of ambition, but of purpose. He had taught for so long within stone walls. Perhaps now it was time to learn beyond them. The days that followed were filled with quiet thought. He continued his duties, training his Pokémon, tending to his siblings, and maintaining the gym. Yet beneath each motion lay a growing restlessness, a sense that something new was approaching. That feeling deepened one afternoon, when a storm swept across Pewter City. The rain fell heavily, washing the dust from the mountain's face, turning the paths slick and dark. Thunder echoed through the valley, deep and rolling. As Brock sheltered inside with his Pokémon, tending the lamps and calming his smaller companions, he thought of the boy traveling onward through that storm. There was something symbolic in that thought, of youth moving through chaos, of courage facing uncertainty. He envied it, but not with bitterness. It was admiration, a reminder of the vitality that once burned within him, now tempered by time. When the storm finally cleared, the world outside glistened. The stones were clean, reflecting sunlight in glimmers of silver. Brock stepped outside, feeling the fresh scent of rain and renewal. The world seemed awake in a new way. It was then that he knew he could no longer remain only as the guardian of beginnings. His lessons had value, but they could reach further, beyond the gym, beyond Pewter, beyond even his own understanding of strength. Leaving would not mean abandoning his home. It would mean expanding the circle of what he could protect. He spoke with his siblings that evening, his voice calm and gentle. They were older now, stronger, capable of caring for one another. He had raised them not just to survive, but to thrive. Their eyes held a mixture of sadness and pride as he explained that he might soon travel to see the world, to learn and teach in new ways. They understood, even if it hurt. They had always known that Brock's path, like the mountain's river, could not stay still forever. That night, as the stars stretched across the dark sky, Brock sat outside once more. Geodude rested near his feet, silent but watchful. Onyx slumbered beyond the hills, its massive form outlined against the dim horizon. The world was vast, and he was a small part of it. But even the smallest stone shaped the flow of time. He thought of Ash again, of his earnestness, his clumsy courage, his boundless curiosity. There was something infectious about it. Brock smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes not from humor, but from clarity. In the days that followed, word reached him again of the boy and his journey, rumors carried by passing travelers and young challengers returning from afar. Each tale added another thread to the growing tapestry of Brock's decision. He had taught others the meaning of endurance. Now, Perhaps it was time to learn the meaning of movement. So, one quiet morning, before dawn had touched the sky, Brock rose. The house was still. His siblings slept peacefully, their dreams soft and untroubled. He prepared a small pack filled with essentials, food, herbs, medical supplies, and the notes he had written over the years. His Pokémon were ready. They had always been ready. He left a letter on the table, a message not of farewell, but of trust. Then he stepped outside into the stillness of dawn. The city below was bathed in faint light, each stone glimmering as though waking from a long slumber. The path ahead stretched beyond sight, winding between valleys and forests. Brock stood for a long time, breathing deeply, feeling the air fill his lungs with the promise of change. For the first time in years, he was not a guardian waiting for others to arrive. He was a traveler setting forth himself. As he began to walk, his steps were slow but sure. Geodude floated beside him, humming softly. The path wound downward, away from the familiar cliffs, into open land. And though he knew not where it would lead, he carried with him everything that mattered: the lessons of stone, the patience of earth, the kindness of care. Behind him, Pewter City grew smaller, but its strength remained within him. Before him, the world opened in silence and light. The road ahead would not be easy. It would twist, rise, fall. But Brock had long ago learned that all things enduring are shaped by pressure, by time, by movement. And as the sun rose fully above the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched before him like a promise, Brock smiled quietly to himself. The path of stone had taught him how to stand. Now, the path of life would teach him how to walk. The world beyond Pewter City opened like a quiet dawn after a long night. Each morning of Brock's new journey carried the scent of fresh soil and distant rain, of trails unworn and horizons unseen. The stone beneath his feet gave way to dirt, grass, and forest roots. Soft and uneven, alive in a way the mountains were not. It was a strange feeling, at first, to leave behind the certainty of stone for the unpredictability of the road. For years, his world had been framed by cliffs and gym walls, shaped by routine and the stillness of endurance. Now, every step carried change. Every moment brought sound, the rush of rivers, the wind through trees, the laughter of companions. Ash walked ahead most of the time, full of restless energy, his excitement spilling into every word and motion. He would point out wild Pokémon with enthusiasm, strategize aloud, and run toward each new discovery without hesitation. Misty, by contrast, carried a tempered sharpness, her thoughts quick, her reactions precise, a balance to Ash's impulsiveness. Brock followed behind, not out of weariness, but by choice. From there, he could observe the landscape, the weather, the moods of his companions. It was in his nature to see first, to act second. Observation had always been his strength, and it remained his quiet anchor even as the world grew larger. He found comfort in small routines, even on the road. Each morning, he would rise before the others, gather herbs from the edges of the trail, and prepare simple meals. Food was more than sustenance to him. It was care made visible, a way of grounding their journey. Ash would eat quickly and thank him between bites, while Misty would comment on how surprisingly balanced his cooking was. Brock would smile, not for praise, but for the peace of normalcy in a life now constantly moving. As the days unfolded, he learned to see strength in new forms. The path revealed Pokémon he had never encountered in person before, creatures of water, grass, and air. He watched how they moved, how they reacted to their surroundings, and he took quiet notes in his small journal each night. The world, he realized, was full of lessons, written not in stone, but in motion. He watched Ash grow with every battle, stumbling, learning, adapting. The boy's spirit was relentless, unshaken even by defeat. Each loss became fuel, each success a stepping stone toward understanding. There was something deeply honest in that kind of persistence, something that reminded Brock of his own philosophy, yet expressed in a different way. Ash's fire met Brock's calm like two forces of nature learning to coexist. Where Brock was deliberate, Ash was spontaneous. Where Brock observed, Ash acted. And yet, somehow, they balanced each other, the flame and the stone, each tempering the other without realizing it. Misty, too, became a source of insight. Her confidence came not from stillness, but from movement, from precision and adaptability. She reminded Brock that control did not always come from grounding oneself like a rock. Sometimes it came from flowing like water. Her skill with water-type Pokémon fascinated him. The grace, the synchronization, the intuitive understanding between trainer and Pokémon. Watching her battle was like watching a river find its course, deliberate yet fluid. These two young trainers, so different from him, yet so alive, taught him something profound. They showed him that strength could sing as well as hum, that life, like battle, was not meant to be endured alone, but shared in rhythm with others. In quiet moments by the campfire, Brock would look at them, Ash practicing commands with Pikachu, Misty cleaning her Pokeballs with steady hands, and feel a deep, calm pride. Not as a mentor above them, but as a companion among them. His Pokémon, too, changed in subtle ways. Geodude, once so rigid in discipline, began to relax in the company of others. Onyx moved slower, gentler, adapting to the open roads and softer terrains. The journey expanded not only Brock's world, but theirs, from stone to soil, from isolation to connection. One evening, they reached a clearing overlooking a wide valley. The sun was low, casting the world in orange and gold. Ash cheered at the sight, pointing toward the far edge of the landscape where the next town glimmered faintly in the distance. Misty rolled her eyes at his enthusiasm, though a faint smile betrayed her own excitement. Brock said little. He stood a few paces behind, feeling the air shift as day gave way to dusk. The horizon stretched endlessly before him, a reminder that the world would always be larger than he could imagine. He breathed deeply, and for a moment he thought of Pewter City, of the stone gym and the silence of the mountains. A part of him missed that quiet, that weight of stillness. But another part, deeper, quieter, understood that this, too, was a kind of peace. A peace born not of silence, but of motion shared with others. That night, after dinner, while Ash and Misty talked under the stars, Brock wrote in his journal. He wrote about the balance between stillness and motion, between stone and sky. He wrote about patience, not as waiting, but as listening to the rhythm of what surrounds you. And he wrote about care, how cooking a meal, mending a wound, or calming a frightened Pokémon were all forms of the same gentle strength. His words came slowly, measured, deliberate. They were not meant to be read by anyone else. They were reminders to himself, fragments of clarity to return to when the road grew uncertain. As the weeks passed, the trio encountered challenges that tested more than their battling skill. Long stretches of road under the heat of the sun, sudden storms that forced them to find shelter, and moments of tension when exhaustion pressed against patience. Brock found himself stepping into the quiet role of mediator, not because he sought it, but because it came naturally. He had learned, from years of caring for his siblings, how to ease frustration without words. Sometimes it was through food, sometimes through a calm suggestion, sometimes through silence itself. He began to realize that leadership was not about control. It was about creating space where others could grow. Ash and Misty both grew stronger in his presence, and so did he in theirs. Each taught him something vital about the kind of strength he had once believed to be solitary. He learned that patience was not the absence of motion, it was harmony with it. There were moments when they would stop by a river or a forest glade, and Brock would sit quietly, feeling the ground beneath him. The soil was softer than stone, but no less honest. It held life, not in its stillness, but in its cycles, in the constant exchange of giving and taking, of roots reaching and rain falling. It was there, sitting by the earth's quiet pulse, that Brock began to understand a new truth, that endurance was not only about standing firm, but about allowing oneself to change. One afternoon, While traveling through a stretch of tall grass and uneven terrain, the group came across an injured wild Pokémon, a small, trembling creature with a wounded leg. Ash, eager and concerned, rushed forward. Misty hesitated, cautious but compassionate. Brock moved slowly, kneeling beside the Pokémon with calm, measured gestures. He spoke softly, not words of command, but of reassurance. The creature watched him with wary eyes, breathing fast. Brock reached into his pack, pulling out salve made from herbs he'd gathered along the road. He applied it gently, careful not to cause pain. His movements were deliberate, his voice steady. The Pokémon relaxed, its breathing slowing. It allowed his touch, and soon the fear in its eyes softened into trust. Ash and Misty watched in silence. It was a small moment, yet it carried weight. A reminder that strength is not always loud nor seen in battle. Sometimes it is found in the gentleness to heal. That night, Ash mentioned how Brock seemed to understand Pokémon on a level beyond training. Brock smiled faintly, not answering. For him, it was not about understanding. It was about listening. Listening to silence, to movement, to the quiet voices that lived between words. As the moon rose, casting pale light over their campsite, Brock found himself staring into the fire. Its flames danced and cracked softly, their warmth steady but fleeting. He thought again of the mountain, of stone that endures and flame that moves. Both had lessons, both had value, and perhaps the true strength lay in learning to carry both within. His journey had only just begun, yet already it had reshaped him. He no longer saw himself only as the guardian of Pewter's stone halls. He was a traveler, a caretaker, a witness to the vastness of the world. Each road, each companion, each quiet evening under the stars had become a teacher. The wind shifted. The embers of the fire glowed brighter for a moment, then dimmed. The forest whispered softly around them. Brock closed his journal and looked to the horizon, unseen in the dark, yet always waiting. He knew now that the road itself was an endless teacher. Every mile carried meaning. Every silence held truth. He leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the rhythm of the night, the breathing of his Pokémon, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of distant rivers. And there, in that calm expanse of sound and stillness, Brock understood another quiet truth, that even when far from home, one can still carry home within. That care, patience, and endurance are not tied to a place. They are tied to the heart that chooses to live by them. The stars above shimmered faintly, reflected in his calm gaze. The road ahead stretched on, unseen but certain. And as the night deepened, Brock rested beside his companions, the flame, the water, and the stone, each carrying their own form of strength, each shaping the other in silence. The morning sun rose pale and soft, casting a gentle glow through the trees. The group stirred slowly from their rest. Ash was the first to rise, his energy as boundless as ever, while Misty muttered something about needing 5 more minutes of sleep before reluctantly sitting up. Brock was already awake. He had been for some time. He sat beside the dying embers of the campfire, stirring the ashes with a thin branch, his eyes calm and distant. It was not that he lacked rest. Rather, his body had learned to wake with the rhythm of the world around him, the whisper of wind, the murmur of a nearby river, the faint shifting of Pokémon in the underbrush. These sounds had become the gentle chime of his mornings. Traveling had taught him many things already, but among the most profound was this, that leadership, true leadership, is often silent. Ash and Misty were strong in their own ways, bold, determined, filled with the fire of youth. But they were also still learning how to walk in harmony with the world around them. Brock, older and tempered by responsibility, had become the quiet weight that balanced their energy. He did not command, nor did he control. Instead, he observed, and when the time was right, he guided. The road that day led them through a stretch of open meadow, the kind that stretched so far it seemed to blend with the sky. The grass brushed softly against their legs, glimmering with morning dew. A flock of pidgey moved lazily above, their wings catching the sun in golden flashes. The air smelled faintly of wildflowers and fresh rain, a rare calm after days of rougher terrain. Ash talked eagerly as they walked, recounting their recent battles and speculating about what kind of Pokémon they might encounter next. Misty replied with dry humor, sometimes teasing him, sometimes challenging his ideas. Brock listened quietly, his expression thoughtful, the faintest of smiles resting on his face. Their conversations reminded him of his siblings, of noise and warmth, of gentle chaos that came from people who cared deeply but expressed it differently. It was comforting, in a way, the kind of noise that made silence meaningful. By midday, the sun stood high. The air grew warm, and the group decided to rest beneath a cluster of trees near a shallow stream. Brock knelt by the water, filling his canteen, watching his reflection ripple across the surface. His face had changed subtly since leaving Pewter City, the lines of duty softened by travel. His eyes reflecting not just endurance, but understanding. He had spent so long defining himself by responsibility that he had forgotten what it meant to simply exist in the present. The road was teaching him that lesson, to walk without a destination, to act without burden. As he prepared food for the group, he noticed how natural his motions had become. His hands moved with practiced ease, slicing berries, stirring rice, adjusting the fire. Each gesture was a form of meditation, an unspoken rhythm of care. The others might have seen it as habit, but for Brock, it was ritual, a reminder that even in motion, one could create stillness. When Ash thanked him, Brock only nodded. Words, he knew, were not always necessary. Sometimes, presence was enough. The afternoon stretched on peacefully until a sudden cry broke the calm. A wild Pokémon, frightened, perhaps lost, darted across their path, its eyes wide with confusion. Pikachu reacted first, sparks flickering instinctively. Ash, impulsive as ever, prepared to follow, his hand already reaching for a Pokéball. Brock's voice, calm and firm, stopped him. Wait. It was a single word, spoken softly yet carrying weight. Ash paused, his instincts clashing with curiosity. Brock approached slowly, lowering himself to the creature's level. He observed its trembling frame, its uneven breathing. The Pokémon wasn't aggressive, it was afraid. He extended a hand, not to capture, but to comfort. The Pokémon hesitated, then inched closer, drawn by the quiet steadiness in Brock's demeanor. No sudden movements, no commands, only calm. After a few moments, the tension in the creature's body eased. It blinked once, then turned and disappeared into the grass, no longer panicked. Ash blinked, bewildered. How did you know it wasn't going to attack? Brock looked toward the direction it had fled, his expression serene. Because fear doesn't sound like anger, he said simply. That answer stayed with Ash long after they resumed walking. Misty glanced at Brock, something like respect in her gaze, though she said nothing. Moments like that defined Brock's quiet guidance. He never lectured. He didn't need to. His lessons lived in observation, in timing, in the calm between moments. That evening, as the sky turned violet and gold, they camped near a ridge overlooking the forest. The day's warmth faded, replaced by the crisp coolness of approaching night. Ash and Misty argued playfully over who would gather more firewood, while Brock set up the cooking pot, his movements slow and deliberate. He felt the wind shift, carrying the distant hum of wild Pokémon settling into their nests. The world felt wide and peaceful. As the first stars appeared, Brock looked toward the horizon and thought of Pewter once again, of the mountain paths, of his younger siblings, asleep under the same sky. He missed them, but it was not a sorrowful kind of longing. It was soft, grounding. They were safe, and that was enough. He had come to realize that caring does not always mean staying. Sometimes it means trusting that what you have built will endure even in your absence. The fire crackled quietly as night deepened. The three companions sat together, eating in silence, broken only by the occasional sound of laughter or the distant call of a noctowl. The stars above shimmered with the kind of clarity only found far from cities. bright, infinite, timeless. Brock watched the flames, lost in thought. He remembered the first time he had ever been trusted with responsibility. The day his parents had left. The day he had promised his siblings that he would keep them safe. That promise had defined him for so long that he had come to wear it like armor. But now, as he watched Ash and Misty by the fire, he realized something he had never allowed himself to before. Guidance is not a burden, it is a gift. To guide others is to believe in their ability to find their own path, to walk beside them without holding them back. His role was not to lead or protect constantly, but to ensure that when they stumbled, they could rise stronger. That realization brought with it a sense of peace deeper than any he had known. It was the kind of understanding that did not arrive suddenly, but built quietly over time, like the slow erosion that shapes stone. He thought of Geodude, always patient in its stillness, of Onyx, whose power was balanced by gentleness, of the many Pokémon and people he had met who had taught him, in different ways, the same truth. That true strength is not control, it is trust. Later, when the others had fallen asleep, Brock remained awake. The fire had dimmed to glowing coals, their light flickering softly across his face. He listened to the night, the whisper of leaves, the breathing of his companions, the distant rhythm of nature in balance. He reached for his journal, opening to a blank page. His handwriting was slow, careful, each word deliberate. He wrote, "Guidance is the art of being present without standing in the way. Strength does not mean silence. It means choosing when to speak. Even the hardest rock softens in water's time." He paused, watching the ink dry, then closed the journal gently. There was no need to read these words aloud. They were not meant to be shared yet. They were lessons still taking root. Lessons he was living, not just writing. As the night deepened, the stilled moon rose high, bathing the camp in pale light. The shadows of the trees swayed lightly, and a faint breeze brushed across Brock's face. He leaned back, closing his eyes, feeling the quiet peace of purpose welling within him. He had once thought that his path was made of stone, alone, solid, unchanging. But now, walking among others, he saw that even stone travels. It crumbles, reshapes, returns to the earth, and becomes something new. He smiled faintly. The road ahead would be long, filled with trials and changes, but he no longer feared them. He carried within him the patience of the mountain, the calm of the river, and the quiet wisdom of care. The fire flickered once more before settling into embers. The forest exhaled softly, and beneath the stars, Brock drifted into rest, his heart steady, his thoughts at peace, his path continuing forward, unseen but unwavering. The morning sun rose pale and soft, casting a gentle glow through the trees. The group stirred slowly from their rest. Ash was the first to rise, his energy as boundless as ever, while Misty muttered something about needing 5 more minutes of sleep before reluctantly sitting up. Brock was already awake. He had been for some time. He sat beside the dying embers of the campfire, stirring the ashes with a thin branch, his eyes calm and distant. It was not that he lacked rest. Rather, his body had learned to wake with the rhythm of the world around him. The whisper of wind, the murmur of a nearby river, the faint shifting of Pokémon in the underbrush. These sounds had become the gentle chime of his mornings. Traveling had taught him many things already, but among the most profound was this: that leadership, true leadership, is often silent. Ash and Misty were strong in their own ways, bold, determined, filled with the fire of youth. But they were also still learning how to walk in harmony with the world around them. Brock, older and tempered by responsibility, had become the quiet weight that balanced their energy. He did not command, nor did he control. Instead, he observed, and when the time was right, he guided. The road that day led them through a stretch of open meadow, the kind that stretched so far it seemed to blend with the sky. The grass brushed softly against their legs, glimmering with morning dew. A flock of Pidgey moved lazily above, their wings catching the sun in golden flashes. The air smelled faintly of wildflowers and fresh rain, a rare calm after days of rougher terrain. Ash talked eagerly as they walked, recounting their recent battles and speculating about what kind of Pokémon they might encounter next. Misty replied with dry humor, sometimes teasing him, sometimes challenging his ideas. Brock listened quietly, his expression thoughtful, the faintest of smiles resting on his face. Their conversations reminded him of his siblings, of noise and warmth, of gentle chaos that came from people who cared deeply but expressed it differently. It was comforting, in a way, the kind of noise that made silence meaningful. By midday, the sun stood high, the air grew warm, and the group decided to rest beneath a cluster of trees near a shallow stream. Brock knelt by the water, filling his canteen, watching his reflection ripple across the surface. His face had changed subtly since leaving Pewter City, the lines of duty softened by travel, his eyes reflecting not just endurance, but understanding. He had spent so long defining himself by responsibility that he had forgotten what it meant to simply exist in the present. The road was teaching him that lesson, to walk without a destination, to act without burden. As he prepared food for the group, he noticed how natural his motions had become. His hands moved with practiced ease, slicing berries, stirring rice, adjusting the fire. Each gesture was a form of meditation, an unspoken rhythm of care. The others might have seen it as habit, but for Brock, it was ritual, a reminder that even in motion, one could create stillness. When Ash thanked him, Brock only nodded. Words, he knew, were not always necessary. Sometimes, presence was enough. The afternoon stretched on peacefully until a sudden cry broke the calm. A wild Pokémon, frightened, perhaps lost, darted across their path, its eyes wide with confusion. Pikachu reacted first, sparks flickering instinctively. Ash, impulsive as ever, prepared to follow, his hand already reaching for a Pokéball. Brock's voice, calm and firm, stopped him. Wait. It was a single word, spoken softly yet carrying weight. Ash paused, his instincts clashing with curiosity. Brock approached slowly, lowering himself to the creature's level. He observed its trembling frame, its uneven breathing. The Pokémon wasn't aggressive, it was afraid. He extended a hand, not to capture, but to comfort. The Pokémon hesitated, then inched closer, drawn by the quiet steadiness in Brock's demeanor. No sudden movements, no commands, only calm. After a few moments, the tension in the creature's body eased. It blinked once, then turned and disappeared into the grass. No longer panicked. Ash blinked, bewildered. How did you know it wasn't going to attack? Brock looked toward the direction it had fled, his expression serene. Because fear doesn't sound like anger, he said simply. That answer stayed with Ash long after they resumed walking. Misty glanced at Brock, something like respect in her gaze, though she said nothing. Moments like that defined Brock's quiet guidance. He never lectured. He didn't need to. His lessons lived in observation, in timing, in the calm between moments. That evening, as the sky turned violet and gold, they camped near a ridge overlooking the forest. The day's warmth faded, replaced by the crisp coolness of approaching night. Ash and Misty argued playfully over who would gather more firewood, while Brock set up the cooking pot, his movements slow and deliberate. He felt the wind shift, carrying the distant hum of wild Pokémon settling into their nests. The world felt wide and peaceful. As the first stars appeared, Brock looked toward the horizon and thought of Pewter once again, of the mountain paths, of his younger siblings asleep under the same sky. He missed them, but it was not a sorrowful kind of longing. It was soft, grounding. They were safe, and that was enough. He had come to realize that caring does not always mean staying. Sometimes it means trusting that what you have built will endure even in your absence. The fire crackled quietly as night deepened. The three companions sat together, eating in silence, broken only by the occasional sound of laughter or the distant call of a noctowl. The stars above shimmered with the kind of clarity only found far from cities. Bright, infinite, timeless. Brock watched the flames, lost in thought. He remembered the first time he had ever been trusted with responsibility, the day his parents had left, the day he had promised his siblings that he would keep them safe. That promise had defined him for so long that he had come to wear it like armor. But now, as he watched Ash and Misty by the fire, he realized something he had never allowed himself to before. Guidance is not a burden. It is a gift. To guide others is to believe in their ability to find their own path, to walk beside them without holding them back. His role was not to lead or protect constantly, but to ensure that when they stumbled, they could rise stronger. That realization brought with it a sense of peace, deeper than any he had known. It was the kind of understanding that did not arrive suddenly, but built quietly over time, like the slow erosion that shapes stone. He thought of Geodude, always patient in its stillness, of Onyx, whose power was balanced by gentleness, of the many Pokémon and people he had met who had taught him, in different ways, the same truth, that true strength is not control, it is trust. Later, when the others had fallen asleep, Brock remained awake. The fire had dimmed to glowing coals, their light flickering softly across his face. He listened to the night, the whisper of leaves, the breathing of his companions, the distant rhythm of nature in balance. He reached for his journal, opening to a blank page. His handwriting was slow, careful, each word deliberate. He wrote, "Guidance is the art of being present without standing in the way. Strength does not mean silence. It means choosing when to speak. Even the hardest rock softens in water's time." He paused, watching the ink dry, then closed the journal gently. There was no need to read these words aloud. They were not meant to be shared yet. They were lessons, still taking root. Lessons he was living, not just writing. As the night deepened, the moon rose high, bathing the camp in pale light. The shadows of the trees swayed lightly, and a faint breeze brushed across Brock's face. He leaned back, closing his eyes, feeling the quiet peace of purpose welling within him. He had once thought that his path was made of stone, alone, solid, unchanging. But now, walking among others, he saw that even stone travels. It crumbles, reshapes, returns to the earth, and becomes something new. He smiled faintly. The road ahead would be long, filled with trials and changes, but he no longer feared them. He carried within him the patience of the mountain, the calm of the river, and the quiet wisdom of care. The fire flickered once more before settling into embers. The forest exhaled softly, and beneath the stars, Brock drifted into rest, his heart steady, his thoughts at peace, his path continuing forward, unseen but unwavering. Morning came softly, the forest veiled in a cool silver mist. The dew clung to the edges of leaves, glimmering faintly under the first light. The camp stirred slowly, each sound, the rustle of fabric, the quiet stretching of limbs, weaving into the rhythm of a new day. Brock was, as always, awake before the others. He moved with practiced care, not to disturb the stillness that lingered. The world at dawn was fragile, a moment balanced between sleep and wakefulness. It was the time he cherished most, when thoughts were clearest, when the world seemed to whisper rather than speak. He gathered stones from the edge of the riverbank, arranging them in a circle. His Pokémon, ever faithful, assisted in small ways. Geodude helped balance the heavier rocks, its movements slow but steady, while Onyx watched from the tree's edge, its massive body coiled in patient silence. The fire kindled with a faint crackle, and Brock prepared a modest breakfast. He found calm in repetition, in the small rituals that tied one day to the next. They were reminders that life, no matter how far one traveled, was built upon constancy. As the others awoke, the day unfolded into quiet motion. They packed their supplies, adjusted their maps, and continued down the winding path that led through the forest. The air was filled with the scent of pine and the soft hum of distant life. Ash walked ahead, his step eager, eyes fixed on the horizon. Misty followed close, commenting occasionally on the terrain or the unusual patterns of wild Pokémon. Brock trailed behind, observing not just the world, but his companions. He had come to recognize the rhythm of their movements, the subtle changes in their demeanor, the way Ash leaned forward slightly when he was determined, the way Misty's steps quickened when she grew anxious. He noticed these things not because he sought to correct them, but because they told him when to speak and when to remain silent. Being a teacher, he realized, was not about instruction. It was about perception. He recalled the years in Pewter City, surrounded by his siblings. He had learned then that teaching was an act of patience, one that required more listening than talking. Children, Pokémon, companions, all learned in their own rhythm. To rush that rhythm was to disrupt it. So he waited. When the trail grew steep, Brock let Ash take the lead, allowing him to discover how to balance his pace. When Misty hesitated at the crossing of a stream, he stepped aside, trusting her to find her footing. His hands were ready to assist, but only if they were needed. It was an act of quiet restraint, the hardest lesson for anyone who had spent a lifetime protecting others. By noon, the forest opened into a wide clearing where sunlight spilled like liquid gold. A small pond shimmered at its center, fed by a trickling spring. The group paused there, grateful for the rest. Pikachu and the other Pokémon played near the water's edge, their reflections rippling softly on the surface. Brock sat nearby, his back against a smooth stone. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the sun settle into his skin. His thoughts drifted like leaves upon the current of memory. He thought of Flint, his father, and the lessons that had once gone unspoken between them. He remembered the day his father returned, weary but changed, and the quiet forgiveness that passed without words. Brock had not realized it then, but that silence had been its own kind of teaching. A lesson about endurance and the quiet mending that time allows. He smiled faintly at the thought. The others were laughing now, their voices light against the gentle hum of nature. Brock opened his eyes, watching them, the way Ash's energy drew the world toward him, the way Misty's sharpness balanced that force. They were learning too, though perhaps they did not yet realize it. He picked up a small stone from the ground, smooth and cool to the touch. Holding it in his palm, he studied its surface, the fine lines carved by water and time. Every stone, he thought, began as something rough. Pressure, friction, and persistence shaped it. The same was true for people, for trainers, for those who sought understanding. He tossed the stone gently into the pond. It disappeared beneath the surface with barely a sound, sending rings of ripples across the water. Teaching was like that. The act itself, subtle, but the effect enduring. As the afternoon passed, clouds gathered. A faint wind began to stir the trees. Brock felt the change before the first drop of rain fell. He had learned to read the world that way, not in forecasts or signs, but in feeling. The group hurried to find shelter, settling beneath a thick canopy of trees as the drizzle became steady rain. Thunder rumbled far off, soft and distant. The world dimmed, wrapped in the gray hush of the storm. Ash, restless as always, complained about the delay. Misty rolled her eyes, but said little. Brock merely sat, listening to the rain's rhythm against the leaves. There was beauty in the storm, in the way it transformed the familiar into something alive. He watched how droplets slid from the tips of branches, merging and falling into the earth below. Each drop, small and fleeting, yet part of a larger, endless cycle. The storm reminded him of patience, of how the world did not resist change but moved through it with grace. When the rain finally eased, the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and renewal. The forest glistened. The group emerged from their shelter, their clothes damp but spirits lifted. Ash laughed, running ahead, his energy undiminished. Brock followed more slowly, his eyes lingering on the way the world seemed new after rain. Every leaf seemed sharper, every color deeper. It was as though the forest itself had been reborn. By evening, they found themselves at the edge of a small cliff overlooking a wide valley. Below, the landscape stretched in serene beauty, rolling fields, rivers winding like silver threads, and the faint outline of distant towns. They decided to rest there for the night. Brock built a small fire, its glow soft and golden against the encroaching dusk. Misty tended to the sleeping bags, while Ash stared in awe at the view below. As the stars emerged, one by one, Brock sat quietly by the fire, lost in contemplation. He realized that the journey itself had become the classroom. Every day brought lessons, not just for the others, but for himself. Patience, observation, humility. These were not simply virtues, they were practices. To teach them, he had to live them. He thought again of Pewter City, of his siblings who had once looked to him for guidance. He hoped they were learning their own lessons now, that love could be strength, that care could be freedom. The fire crackled softly. Sparks rose into the night, vanishing into the darkness above. Brock reached for his notebook once more, the one he carried quietly since the journey began. He turned to a new page, the paper faintly smudged from travel. His handwriting flowed steady and slow. He wrote, "Teaching is not telling, it is showing, and then stepping back. Patience is not waiting, doesn't that telling. It is faith in another's rhythm, to guide without holding. That is the art of trust." He paused, reading the words as the fire's glow shifted. He could feel the truth of them, not as knowledge, but as lived understanding. When he looked up again, the stars seemed brighter. The constellations were familiar, the same ones that had hung over Pewter City, over his home, over every place he had ever stood. It comforted him to know that no matter where they traveled, the same sky watched over them. He leaned back, feeling the earth beneath him, solid, unmoving, eternal. Like stone, it held the memory of all who had walked upon it. The others had drifted into quiet rest, their breathing even, and slow. Brock watched the fire until it burned low, its embers glowing like fading stars. He thought of what it meant to be a teacher, not through lectures or authority, but through stillness, example, and presence. He had learned from the world itself, from mountains that stood patient, from rivers that carved their path through time, from Pokémon who spoke through silence. He smiled faintly, closing his eyes. In that calm, he understood something deeper still, that teaching was not a role to perform, but a way of being. It was the act of walking beside others, sharing the light of understanding without claiming it. And so, under the vast and unchanging stars, Brock slept, not as a leader or protector, but as a traveler among travelers, a teacher still learning from the quiet wisdom of the road. The night held its breath, and the journey continued. The morning rose over the valley, like the slow unfurling of a dream. The mists clung to the lowlands, weaving through the grass in pale ribbons, and the sun, just cresting the distant ridges, cast its warmth upon the waking world. Brock stirred before the others, as he always did. The embers of the night's fire still glowed faintly beside him, small points of orange light breathing against the gray dawn. He crouched beside them, his hands steady, adding a few dry twigs until the flame revived. The smoke curled upward in thin, blue lines, carrying the faint scent of pine and ash. He found comfort in these quiet beginnings, the hour when the earth seemed to whisper, not speak. The rhythm of travel, the repetition of small rituals, gave structure to the uncertainty of the road. It was, in its way, a kind of meditation. Ash still slept, his cap tilted over his eyes. Pikachu curled close to his side. Misty was half awake, stirring beneath her blanket, murmuring something about needing 5 more minutes. Brock smiled faintly. These were the moments that reminded him why he walked with them, not for victory, nor recognition, but for this simple, shared humanity. By the time the sun had cleared the horizon, the group was moving again. Their path led them through a stretch of open fields that shimmered with the remnants of rain. The grass brushed against their ankles, glittering with droplets that caught the light like glass. Far in the distance, mountains rose, dark and still, their peaks lost in a halo of clouds. Brock's gaze lingered there, The sight of mountains always stirred something within him, something deep and wordless. They reminded him of home, of Pewter City, of the quiet strength of stone. But they also reminded him of endurance, of how even mountains could change, crumbling and reshaping with time. The day grew warm. They paused at midday beneath a tall cluster of rocks, where the shade was cool and the air carried the hum of unseen life. Brock set down his pack, reaching for his water canteen. As he drank, he noticed the faint scent of smoke drifting through the air. It was distant at first, then sharper. He lifted his head. Across the valley, where the grass stretched toward the horizon, a faint orange glow flickered. The shimmer of heat rose above it. Fire. Not a great one. Not yet. But the kind that moved fast when the wind carried it. Brock rose, eyes narrowing, as he studied the landscape. The fire was small, perhaps ignited by lightning or the careless spark of a campfire. But the dry grass and steady breeze meant it could spread quickly. The others noticed soon after, their attention drawn to the same horizon. Without words, the rhythm of the group shifted. Brock moved first, assessing the direction of the wind, the slope of the land. The flames were not yet close enough to endanger them, but the wild Pokémon of the region would not be as fortunate. He began walking toward the edge of the fires, his pace steady, not hurried. He had learned long ago that panic only fueled chaos. The others followed, sensing his calm and matching it. As they approached, the heat grew more tangible, not unbearable, but present, alive. The grass crackled softly underfoot, and the air shimmered with warmth. Brock observed the pattern of the flames, how they moved, where they leaned. It was not destruction he saw, but nature's cycle, creation through renewal. Yet he also understood the fragility of balance. Fire gave life, but it also demanded care. He released his onyx, its immense form rising like a gray monument against the shifting light. The ground trembled faintly as the rock Pokémon coiled protectively between the group and the approaching flame. Brock guided it with gestures, ensuring that it used its body to form a barrier, a wall of stone and earth to slow the fire's advance. Nearby, wild Pokémon emerged from the grass. Pidgey, Rattata, small shapes darting through the air in confusion. Brock knelt, guiding them gently away from the danger. His movements were deliberate, calm. He did not chase, he directed. The others mirrored him, their earlier unease replaced by focus. It was not a battle, yet it demanded all their attention. The wind shifted once more, and for a moment the flames bent toward them, flaring higher with a deep, resonant crackle. Brock stood firm. The heat brushed his face. The light flickered across his eyes. He did not move backward. He felt the earth beneath his boots, solid and grounding. This was what it meant to be of stone, not unfeeling, but unwavering. When the fire finally reached the line of broken ground created by onyx, it slowed. The earth, disturbed and damp from the morning rain, resisted the spread. Slowly, the flames weakened, feeding only on small tufts of grass before fading into smoke. Brock exhaled softly. The danger was over. They spent the rest of the afternoon helping the land recover, clearing small embers, ensuring the wild Pokémon had fled to safety. When at last the valley grew still again, the group sat together on the edge of a rocky ridge, watching the last threads of smoke rise into the sky. The air was heavy with the scent of ash and renewal. The sun, descending behind the clouds, painted the world in hues of gold and amber. Brock's hands were blackened with soot, but his expression was calm. He watched the horizon in silence, feeling both the exhaustion of effort and the quiet satisfaction that came after. He understood something then, something he had always known, but rarely named. The world was not divided between destruction and creation. Both were part of the same movement, the same endless rhythm. Fire and stone, opposite yet necessary. Fire consumed, stone endured. Fire changed, stone remembered. He looked at his Pokémon, at Onyx, its massive form resting peacefully beside him, its rocky surface dusted with ash. Its eyes, though still and solemn, carried, a deep calm. Brock placed a hand upon it, feeling the warmth of the stone beneath his palm. "You're the mountain that walks," he thought silently, "the strength that bends without breaking." That night, as the stars began to appear, the group set camp on the high ridge. The air was cool now, the memory of the fire fading into quiet. Brock tended the new flames of their campfire with gentle care, feeding it only enough to warm, not consume. He thought about what the day had shown him, about balance, not just between fire and stone, but within himself. For so long, he had seen himself as the solid one, the foundation others could lean on. But strength, he realized, was not only endurance. It was adaptability, the willingness to bend, to change shape without losing essence. Stone and flame, endurance and transformation. He stared into the fire, watching the embers shift and pulse with breath-like rhythm. Each flicker of light reminded him of the heartbeat of life. Fragile, luminous, fleeting. He picked up his notebook, its pages faintly smudged from soot. His handwriting was slower tonight, more reflective. He wrote, "Stone teaches patience. Fire teaches change. Together, they teach harmony. True strength is neither unyielding nor wild. It is balanced, like heat upon the hearth. The teacher must be both, the mountain and the flame that warms it." He closed the book softly, resting it beside him. The stars shone brighter now, scattered like fragments of glass across the blackness. The valley below, once marked by fire, had fallen into peace. A thin mist began to rise again, carrying the scent of earth and rain. Brock lay back upon the ground, his arms folded beneath his head, eyes tracing the constellations above. He wondered how many times the world had burned and renewed itself, how many seasons the mountains had watched pass. He thought of Pewter City again, of the mountains that cradled it, of his siblings whose lives continued beneath the same sky. He hoped they were learning these lessons too, that strength and gentleness were not opposites, but companions. The fire beside him crackled softly, a steady heartbeat in the night. The warmth reached his hands, his chest, his face. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. The scent of smoke and soil filled his lungs, reminders of where he had been, of what he had learned, of who he continued to become. He was no longer only the caretaker of his family, nor just a traveling companion. He was something quieter, deeper, a teacher not of knowledge, but of balance. The night deepened. The stars drifted slowly westward. The fire softened to embers, glowing faintly like the memory of the sun. And Brock, the stone and the flame, drifted into rest, steady, warm, unbroken. Night fell slowly over the rolling hills, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the grass. The air was cool, scented faintly with pine, earth, and the distant trace of river water. Brock lay upon the soft ground, his back resting against a smooth stone, gazing upward at the sky where stars, innumerable and distant, shimmered against the deep black canvas of night. He had walked far that day, and his body ached pleasantly with the exertion. Yet it was not the physical effort that occupied his thoughts. It was the quiet weight of existence itself, the rhythm of the world beneath his feet, and the lessons whispered by everything around him. Ash and Misty had settled near the edge of a gentle slope, their bodies relaxed after the long trek. Pikachu nestled against Ash, its small form a soft heat against the boy's side. Brock allowed himself a moment to simply observe, to drink in the sound of breathing, the subtle rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of nocturnal wrestle. Life awakening in the dark. There was a lesson here, he thought, one that had taken him years to understand fully. The world moved in cycles, not just day and night, storm and calm, growth and decay, but in subtler rhythms. Pokémon lived within these cycles, humans as well, and even the stones themselves bore the memory of time's passage. To walk among them was to be part of something larger, something enduring and unspoken. He traced the constellations with his eyes, recalling their patterns from the quiet nights of Pewter City. The same stars that had hung over his home, over the mountains, over his childhood, now spread across unfamiliar lands. And yet, the distance mattered little. The constellations were a thread linking past, present, and future. A reminder that every step taken in the world, no matter how far from home, was still part of the same grand rhythm. Brock reached for his notebook, flipping open a page he had left blank for this purpose. He wrote slowly, deliberately, each word measured like the steps of a careful climber ascending a mountain. The path is endless, yet each step matters. Each stone, each stream, each shadow holds a story. To walk beneath the stars is to walk with the past, the present, and the future intertwined. The ink dried softly in the quiet air. The words a reflection of thoughts that had formed over miles of road, over hours of observation, over moments of silent teaching. Brock's mind wandered to the day's earlier events, the small forest fire they had encountered, the subtle interventions that had allowed balance to be restored. He realized that guidance, like the path beneath the stars, was rarely dramatic. It did not always announce itself with thunder or flame. More often, it was gentle, quiet, and continuous. A touch here, a suggestion there, a moment of patience when action was not yet required. He glanced at Ash, who had rolled onto his side to rest, and at Misty, her eyes closed, in sleep. Both were young, both still learning. Yet even in sleep, there was growth, subtle and profound. Each challenge faced, each decision made, each moment of attention to the world around them contributed to an invisible framework of understanding, a scaffold that would hold them steady when storms came. The stars reflected in Brock's thoughts like the ripples of a still pond. He realized that his role was no longer merely to instruct, but to witness, to support, and to model the balance he had come to cherish. Strength without compassion was hollow. Patience without engagement was inert. True guidance required a harmony of both, much like the constellations themselves, each star distinct, yet forming a pattern that only revealed itself from a distance. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of wet soil and the faint perfume of wildflowers. Brock closed his eyes, allowing the rhythm of the world to fill him. He felt connected not only to the earth beneath him, but to the sky above, to the unseen currents of air, water, and life. In this quiet, he began to see the journey itself as a teacher. Each path walked, each mountain crossed, each valley descended, and each storm weathered contributed to an understanding deeper than any book or lesson could convey. There was a wisdom in movement, in observation, in patience, and there was a responsibility, not to control the world, but to exist within it consciously, to shape one's actions with care and awareness. His thoughts turned to the small acts of the day, guiding the wild Pokémon to safety, arranging stones to slow the fire, preparing meals with attention to nourishment and comfort. Each was simple, yet each carried profound significance. They were the embodiment of quiet strength, the principle he now understood more fully than ever. The fire they had kindled for warmth glowed faintly nearby, its light soft against the night. Brock allowed it to burn slowly, tending it, minimally, knowing that balance required attention, but not dominance. He had learned to trust processes, to recognize that the natural flow of energy, whether in stone, flame, or life itself, could achieve harmony when respected. As the hours passed, the constellations shifted imperceptibly across the sky. Brock watched, noting the subtle changes, feeling the passage of time not as pressure but as rhythm. The world had a pulse, and he was part of it. Each step he had taken, each decision, each act of care was a note in the song of existence. He reached for his notebook again, turning to a fresh page. His pen moved with quiet certainty. To walk beneath the stars is to recognize one's place in the vast tapestry of life. Every being, every stone, every flame has its role. To guide is not to dominate, but to harmonize. The night deepened. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint cry of distant Pokémon. Brock inhaled deeply, the cool air filling his lungs, and felt the subtle warmth of understanding spread through him. He realized, as he had only gradually come to understand, that journeys were not linear. They did not progress in simple sequences of victory or failure, of success or loss. Instead, they unfolded as circles, spirals, and webs, interwoven paths of learning, growth, and reflection. Every encounter, every obstacle, every quiet night beneath the stars was a thread in a larger pattern, one that he could see only with patience and attentiveness. The sound of a nearby stream drew his attention. Water flowed over stones, worn smooth by time, carving its own quiet path through the landscape. He knelt beside it, watching the currents move without haste, yet without pause. In their motion, he saw a mirror of the journey he now walked, continuous, fluid, persistent, shaping the world and being shaped in return. Brock allowed his fingers to trail through the water. The cool sensation grounded him, a tactile reminder that the world was alive in all its forms, and that every action, however small, contributed to the ongoing rhythm of life. When he rose, he glanced again at his companions, sleeping peacefully near the fire. They trusted him implicitly, though he had said little. It was not words that built trust, he knew, but consistency, attentiveness, and the quiet alignment of action with principle. He returned to his vantage point on the ridge, gazing out over the valley. Moonlight glimmered faintly on the distant river, and shadows moved with the gentle sway of trees. The world, he realized, was vast, mysterious, and deeply interconnected. Every creature, every human, every mountain and stream played its part. The thought brought with it a profound serenity. He was but one element in this immense tapestry. Yet his presence, like the careful placement of a stone in a stream, could guide the flow of events in subtle, meaningful ways. Brock opened his notebook one final time that night. Pen moving, the path, beneath the stars, teaches humility and wonder. It reminds us that strength is both presence and restraint, guidance and freedom. To walk with others is to learn, to witness, and to harmonize with the world itself. The fire flickered once, then settled. The air was cool, the earth firm beneath him, and the sky unbroken above. Brock lay back, closing his eyes, listening to the subtle symphony of night, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of water, the faint breathing of his companions. He felt the road beneath him, the stars above him, and the pulse of life all around. And in that quiet alignment, he rested, not as a leader, not merely as a companion, but as a traveler, fully aware of the weight and beauty of each step. The night held its calm, infinite and patient, and Brock, steady and contemplative, drifted into sleep beneath the eternal watch of the stars. Dawn unfolded quietly over the horizon, soft light spilling across the rolling hills like liquid gold. The air carried the scent of wet stone and early morning dew, mingled with the faint aroma of pine from distant forests. Brock stirred first, as always, drawing in a deep breath and listening to the world awaken around him. Ash and Misty were slow to rise, their bodies weighed down by fatigue and yet restless with anticipation. Pikachu nestled beside Ash, its small form rising and falling gently with each breath. Brock remained still, savoring the silence that belonged to the early hours, a time untouched by chatter or motion, when observation itself became a quiet lesson. The group had reached the foothills of a vast mountain range. Jagged peaks loomed ahead, their tops shrouded in mist and mystery. Brock's eyes traced the contours of the ridges, noting the way the light struck stone and snow, and how shadows collected in hidden valleys. The mountains were imposing, yet beautiful, reminders of endurance and the slow, deliberate passage of time. He rose to his feet, brushing the dew from his clothing. The trail ahead was steep, uneven, and rocky, demanding careful attention. Every step required balance and focus, and Brock felt the familiar pull of responsibility settle upon him. Not to lead with command, but to guide quietly, ensuring that each companion moved safely and deliberately. As they began the ascent, Brock observed the rhythm of their movements. Ash led with eagerness, sometimes overextending himself, his energy boundless yet untempered. Misty followed with precision, her pace measured, every step calculated, every glance attentive to the terrain. Brock followed, steady, providing subtle corrections without drawing attention. A hand to steady, a stumble, a gentle gesture to signal caution. The mountains demanded respect. Loose rocks shifted underfoot, and narrow ledges required mindfulness. Brock noted how each small challenge mirrored the inner landscapes he had been traversing since leaving Pewter City. Patience, observation, adaptability. The physical act of climbing became a meditation, each movement a reflection of principles he had long cultivated. Midday arrived, the sun reaching its zenith. The temperature rose, and the wind whispered through the crevices of the cliffs, carrying scents of earth, snow, and distant rivers. Brock paused beside a boulder, feeling the stone beneath his hand. Its surface was rough and warm from the sun, textured with the marks of centuries. He drew strength from it, a reminder of endurance and the slow accumulation of knowledge. Above, the peaks glimmered with frost. Brock's gaze lingered on them. The mountains were obstacles, yes, but also teachers. They demanded respect, yet offered insight, about limits, about perseverance, about the quiet reward of measured effort. As they climbed, the air thinned slightly, and each breath became a reminder of fragility. Brock noticed the subtle fatigue creeping into Ash's movements and the tension in Misty's shoulders. He adjusted the pace, not with words, but with silent understanding. They followed instinctively, trusting his calm presence. The climb continued for hours, each step forward an act of balance between effort and care. Brock's mind wandered to the lessons of stone and fire, patience and change. Mountains, like these peaks, embodied both. They were rigid, yet shaped by wind and water, unyielding yet transformed over time. To climb them was to honor both their strength and their vulnerability. When the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, the group reached a high ledge overlooking a sweeping valley. The wind tugged gently at their clothing, carrying the scent of distant forests and the faint cry of wild Pokémon. Brock paused, feeling the weight of the climb, the vast expanse beneath, and the quiet pulse of the earth. He observed Ash's gaze, wide with wonder, and Misty's steady appreciation of the view. The lesson here was subtle. The path is as vital as the summit. Achievement is measured not solely by reaching the peak, but by the care taken with each step, the awareness of the surroundings, the rhythm of one's companions, and the grace with which challenges are met. Night approached swiftly in the high mountains. Brock prepared a modest camp on a flat rock ledge, arranging stones for a small fire. The warmth was gentle against the chill of the altitude. As the others settled, Brock observed the sky. Stars emerged, brilliant and steady, scattered across the darkening heavens like jewels on black velvet. The constellations were unfamiliar, yet they carried the same timeless message, that life unfolds across space and time, and that every being, every mountain, every star is part of an intricate web of connection. Brock opened his notebook, pen moving deliberately. He wrote, "To ascend is to learn the patience of stone. To balance is to respect the weight of the world. The summit is not the goal. Understanding is." The night deepened and the wind softened. Brock allowed himself a moment of reflection, considering the journey behind and the road ahead. Each mountain faced, each storm endured, each quiet night beneath the stars had taught him the same principle, that strength without compassion is brittle, and guidance without awareness is hollow. He thought of the Pokémon they had encountered, of the wild creatures they had aided, of the subtle gestures of care that formed the fabric of their journey. Each small act, feeding, tending, observing, carried more significance than any battle or victory. As sleep approached, Brock gazed again at the peaks above, their jagged forms outlined against the faint light of moonrise. Mountains, he thought, are like life itself, daunting, beautiful, enduring, ever-changing. One must respect their power, move with intention, and accept that the climb is itself the compens. Teacher. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows that danced across the stone. Brock placed his notebook aside and lay back, feeling the solidity of the ledge beneath him. The air was crisp, filled with the quiet symphony of nocturnal life. Distant calls, whispering winds, the soft exhalation of the earth itself. He thought of Pewter City once more, of his siblings, of the lessons he had learned long before leaving home. Yet here, above the valley, surrounded by peaks and stars, he understood that growth was ongoing. Every journey, every challenge, every companion was a teacher, and every day offered a new horizon of understanding. Brock closed his eyes, breathing slowly, letting the rhythm of the mountains fill him. He felt the balance of effort and rest, strength and gentleness, guidance and trust. The stars shone brighter as the night deepened, reflected in the quiet pride he carried. He was not merely a traveler, nor merely a caretaker. He was a student of the world, a companion to those who walked with him, and a quiet teacher in his own right. The mountains stood eternal, patient and unmoving, while the fire beside him glowed with warm impermanence. Brock lay beneath the vast sky, feeling the path beneath him, the peaks above him, and the unbroken continuum of life all around. And in that stillness, he drifted into rest, steady as stone, warm as fire, and aligned with the world he had come to understand so deeply. The morning mist clung softly to the valley, curling around rocks and reeds like silver threads. Brock awoke gently, his body already in tune with the rhythm of the land. The mountains behind them were now bathed in soft sunlight, their peaks glimmering faintly as though brushed with frost. Beneath them flowed a wide, winding river, its waters catching the light in ripples of gold and silver. The group began to move slowly toward the riverbank. The air was crisp, fragrant with earth, water, and pine, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers that had grown near the stream. Brock walked calmly, his gaze sweeping over the flow of water, the shifting reflections, and the gentle sway of reeds and grass. Rivers had always drawn him in, not for their utility, but for their quiet lessons. He observed the surface of the river as they approached, noting the way it moved, endlessly forward, yet never in haste, shaping the land with persistence and subtle force. Each curve of its path, each ripple around a stone, spoke of a balance between strength and patience. The river did not rush, yet it never paused. It acted, transformed, and endured. Ash and Misty explored the banks, scanning for Pokémon, marveling at the glimmering water and the occasional shimmer of scales beneath its surface. Brock remained slightly behind, watching, understanding that the act of observation itself was a lesson he had learned to value. True insight, he had discovered, was often born not in speaking but in quiet awareness. As they reached the water's edge, Brock knelt, letting his hands hover above the current. The river's coolness drew him, its smooth flow reflecting not only the sky, but the subtle movements of the world around it. He traced a finger along the surface, watching the ripples fan outward, a delicate disturbance that traveled without resistance. The river, he realized, was a mirror. It reflected life in all its forms: movement, change, persistence. It showed him the ways in which force could be gentle, how power could harmonize with patience, and how guidance was most effective when it flowed naturally, without obstruction. He gestured subtly, guiding the group to follow the natural curves of the riverbank, moving slowly to avoid disturbing hidden Pokémon. Ash sometimes leaned too eagerly toward the water, his youthful impatience bubbling like a hidden spring, while Misty took measured steps, her careful observation mirroring his own. Brock remained the quiet center, not leading by command, but by presence, offering stability for those who needed it. Hours passed as they followed the river's meandering path. Brock noticed the subtle transformations of the land: stones smoothed by decades of water, reeds bending in harmony with the current, fallen branches shaped by the flow. He thought of his own journey in similar terms, shaped over time by experience, observation, and gentle persistence. The river was teaching him again, as it always had, that strength alone was not enough, that patience was not passive, and that guidance was most profound when aligned with the natural rhythm of the world. They paused beneath a waterfall, where the river tumbled over rocks in a soft cascade. Misty marveled at the water's beauty, Ash shouted with delight at the occasional glimpse of wild Pokémon darting beneath the falls. Brock stayed back, hands resting on a cool stone, observing the harmony of motion and stillness. The waterfall carried its own lesson, energy directed yet harmonious, force tempered by form, constant motion balanced by the weight of the rocks beneath. Brock felt the echo of these lessons in his own heart, in the way he guided and protected, in the quiet consistency of his presence. As they settled near the water for the night, Brock tended a small fire. Its warmth contrasted with the coolness of the river, a gentle balance of elements. He watched the flames flicker, their light dancing on the surface of the water, and the faces of his companions. Ash was restless, tossing small stones into the current, while Misty sketched patterns in the dirt near the bank. Brock allowed them this freedom, knowing that growth was most potent when it flowed naturally, unforced. He opened his notebook, pen moving deliberately across the pages. The river teaches patience and persistence. It shows how force can be gentle and how guidance can flow without obstruction. To walk beside the river is to understand the balance of movement and stillness, of power and care. The night deepened, and the stars reflected in the dark surface of the river. Brock leaned back, listening to the soft murmurs of water, the rustle of reeds, the distant call of nocturnal Pokémon. The world felt infinite and patient, each motion part of a grand rhythm that extended beyond comprehension. He reflected on the day's journey, the careful steps along the riverbank, the small interventions that guided the flow of life, without imposing upon it the quiet attention that preserved harmony. Each action, though subtle, held immense significance. Each choice aligned with principles he had learned and refined. Observation, patience, restraint, and trust. Brock traced the constellations with his eyes, the familiar patterns mirrored faintly on the rippling river. Stars and water, sky and earth, time and flow, all intertwined in a delicate balance. A reminder that life's lessons often emerge from the simplest, quietest observations. He thought of his siblings back in Pewter City, of the quiet care he had provided over the years, of the strength and compassion that had become inseparable. And he understood more deeply now that teaching was less about instruction and more about embodying the principles one wished to impart. The fire beside him burned low, casting soft light on the gentle curves of the riverbank. Brock felt the calm of the night settle into his bones, the rhythm of water, wind, and stars echoing within him. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly, letting the lessons of the river sink into his being. He imagined the river continuing its journey far beyond their sight, winding through valleys, forests, and plains, shaping the land and nourishing life. And he realized that he, too, was part of a larger flow, a quiet thread in the vast tapestry of existence. The soft murmur of the river carried him into reflection. Each moment of care, each act of guidance, each step along the path was like a pebble in the current, seemingly small, yet contributing to the course of life in ways invisible but profound. Brock's mind wandered over the lessons learned from mountains, fire, stone, and now water. Each element carried wisdom: the mountain for endurance, the flame for transformation, the stone for steadfastness, the river for patience and flow. He saw now that his role was to integrate these lessons, to walk among others with balance, and to nurture the growth of those around him, without imposing upon them. As sleep approached, Brock opened his notebook once more, pen tracing slow, deliberate lines. To walk with others is to flow like the river, present, gentle, and unwavering. Guidance is not a force imposed, but a current shared. Strength and patience, like stone and water, shape the world quietly and enduringly. The fire's glow faded to embers, and the stars above shone brightly, mirrored by the rippling water. Brock lay back, feeling the earth beneath him, the cool night air upon his skin, the subtle rhythm of the river carrying the lessons of the day into his heart. He closed his eyes, allowing the steady murmur of water, the distant calls of Pokémon, and the gentle presence of his companions to lull him into rest. In the flow of the river, in the patterns of the stars, in the quiet rhythm of life, he found a profound calm, a sense of alignment with the world around him, and the unspoken understanding that the journey itself was the greatest teacher of all. And beneath the quiet, endless stars, Brock slept, steady, patient, and entirely present, attuned to the eternal flow of life. Dawn unfolded slowly over the distant peaks, casting pale gold light across the forested slopes and the winding trails that led the group onward. Brock rose quietly, his movements deliberate, as though he carried the weight of the day, yet embraced its promise with patience. The morning air was crisp, scented faintly with pine, damp earth, and the subtle fragrance of wildflowers swaying in hidden glades. They approached a valley shrouded in mist, its entrance marked by jagged stones and gnarled trees whose branches arched overhead like silent sentinels. Brock observed the landscape with care, noting the faint echoes of wind and the whispers of leaves in the morning stillness. This place had a presence unlike any other, quiet, mysterious, and profoundly alive. The valley's name had come to them from travelers and local guides. The Valley of Echoes. It was said that voices, footsteps, and even thoughts could reverberate here, carried by unseen currents of air and memory. Brock felt the subtle weight of the legend as he led the group across the threshold. The ground beneath their feet was soft, mossy in some places, firm in others, and punctuated by small stones smoothed by age and passage. As they walked deeper into the valley, Brock noticed the subtle transformations in the atmosphere. Sounds were amplified, yet distorted. A bird's call became a melodic cascade. The rustle of leaves echoed like a faint whisper of conversation. Even their own steps seemed to speak, merging with distant, indistinct murmurs. The effect was surreal, quiet, and slightly unsettling, yet profoundly instructive. Brock moved with measured caution, his attention split between the physical path and the intangible currents of the valley. He was aware that the place offered more than visual beauty. It held reflections, not merely of the world around them, but of the world within. Ash walked ahead, his energy undiminished, yet even he felt the weight of the echoes, pausing at intervals. As his own steps repeated back to him in distorted harmony, Misty observed the patterns of sound, her analytical mind attempting to catalog the phenomenon. Yet even she could not fully capture the subtleties. Brock, however, understood intuitively. The valley was a teacher, not a puzzle to solve. The echoes, Brock realized, mirrored inner thoughts and fears as much as external sounds. The place offered clarity to those willing to listen, reflection to those willing to pause. He had encountered challenges before, mountains, storms, fire, rivers, but none had invited introspection with such deliberate subtlety. They paused near a shallow stream that cut through the valley. The water was calm, reflecting the overhanging trees and the pale light filtering through mist. Brock knelt beside it, placing his hands gently upon the cool surface. The stream, he noted, was like the echoes themselves, moving yet still, reflecting but not distorting entirely, offering a mirror to those who sought insight. He observed Ash and Misty interacting with the valley, their movements cautious yet curious. Brock allowed them to explore, trusting that the place would guide their awareness naturally. There was no need for instruction here. The valley had its own subtle pedagogy, revealing lessons in patience, observation, and self-understanding. As the day progressed, the valley seemed to shift with the sun's movement. Shadows deepened in certain groves, while light danced across stones and water, creating illusions and reflections that were never quite fixed. Brock noted how the interplay of shadow and light could teach humility and adaptability, to move without resistance, to adjust without frustration. He reflected on his own journey. The lessons of mountains, rivers, fire, and stone had brought him understanding, yet the Valley of Echoes offered a new dimension, awareness of self. Here, even the quietest thought could manifest externally, a subtle reminder that inner calm and clarity were prerequisites for guiding others effectively. The group settled near the stream for a brief rest. Brock observed the rippling water, noting how it carried reflections and fragments of light along its course. The echoes in the valley became softer in this secluded spot, revealing nuances that required attentive listening. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself in the rhythm of the valley, in the interplay of sound, reflection, and movement. The Valley of Echoes was a mirror, not only for thought, but for emotion. Brock sensed the tension, the hesitations, and the quiet apprehensions of his companions. He understood that the place encouraged confrontation with subtle fears, whether of inadequacy, impatience, or doubt. Here, guidance required presence more than words, a steady, calm energy to reinforce trust and reflection. Brock knelt beside a moss-covered stone, tracing its texture with his fingers. The ancient surface had endured countless seasons, countless travelers, countless echoes. It was a reminder that stability and patience were intertwined, that endurance was not rigidity, and that teaching required both stillness and awareness. As the sun descended, the light shifted, illuminating hidden corners of the valley in ethereal gold and silver. Brock guided the group toward a higher ridge, where they could observe the entire expanse. The echoes became subtler here, intertwined with the soft rustle of wind through high grasses. He paused, reflecting on the patterns of sound and light, the mirrored reflections in water, the faint traces of movement carried from unseen sources. The valley, in its quiet majesty, had shown him the profound link between perception and guidance, that one cannot lead effectively without understanding the subtle undercurrents of those one accompanies. Brock opened his notebook, pen moving slowly, deliberately. The valley reveals what is often unseen, the reflection of thought, the echoes of feeling, subtle currents of life. To guide is not to impose, but to attune oneself to these currents. Patience, clarity, and presence are the foundations of understanding. The group lingered on the ridge until the last light faded. Stars emerged above, scattered across the deepening sky. Brock observed the constellations, their familiar patterns mirrored faintly in the valleys below. The echoes of sound now mingled with the faintest whisper of night winds, creating a serene, contemplative symphony. He felt the weight of experience, the continuity of learning, and the importance of quiet observation. Mountains had taught endurance. Rivers had taught patience and flow. Fire had taught transformation. And now, the Valley of Echoes taught self-awareness and reflection. Each element combined to shape a teacher not merely of skill, but of presence, balance, and empathy. As night deepened, Brock guided the group to set camp on a flat, elevated patch near the ridge. The fire they built was small, its warmth gentle against the cool mountain air. The embers glowed faintly, flickering in harmony with the stars above. Brock remained awake a while longer, listening to the faint echoes, tracing their origins, contemplating the lessons they offered. He reflected on the subtle responsibilities of guidance, on the delicate balance between intervention and observation, and on the quiet strength required to lead without imposing. He picked up his notebook once more, pen moving with calm precision. The Valley of Echoes teaches reflection. Strength without insight is hollow. Guidance without awareness is empty. To lead is to listen, to observe, and to harmonize with the currents of life. The fire settled into embers, casting a soft glow on the sleeping forms of Ash and Misty nearby. Brock lay back on the moss-covered earth, the night air cool but comforting. The stars mirrored the patterns of light in the valley, reflecting the infinite interplay of past, present, and potential. He allowed himself a final moment of quiet reflection, feeling the enduring pulse of the valley, the gentle rhythm of the river, and the subtle presence of life all around. Here, in this serene convergence of natural force and quiet observation, he understood more fully the essence of his role, not to control, not to command, but to guide with wisdom, patience, and empathy. And beneath the eternal night sky, Brock slept, attuned, calm, and fully present, carrying within him the quiet, enduring lessons of the Valley of Echoes. The first light of dawn painted the horizon in soft shades of rose and gold, spilling across the valley and illuminating distant ridges with a delicate warmth. Brock awoke slowly, his body stretching and settling into the rhythm of a new day. The world beyond the mountains whispered promises of unseen paths, of lands yet untraveled, and of lessons yet to be discovered. The group prepared quietly, each member immersed in their own thoughts. Ash adjusted his cap, Pikachu blinking sleepily, while Misty tightened the straps of her pack with careful precision. Brock observed them, his gaze steady, noting the subtle interplay of anticipation and fatigue that accompanied long journeys. He understood that the unknown could provoke both excitement and hesitation, and that guidance required a steady, reassuring presence. Their path led upward once more, toward a gentle rise that overlooked the valleys they had crossed. The wind carried scents of pine, stone, and the faint trace of water from distant streams. Brock inhaled deeply, allowing the cool air to fill his lungs, grounding himself in the present, while contemplating the horizon beyond. The mountains receded behind them as they advanced, revealing undulating plains that stretched farther than the eye could see. Brock's gaze lingered on the distant line where sky met land, a subtle, unbroken curve that suggested infinite possibility. It was here, in the quiet presence of the unknown, that he felt the weight and wonder of responsibility most acutely. Every journey had taught him lessons, yet the horizon beyond reminded him that learning was continuous. Mountains had taught endurance, rivers had taught patience and flow, fire had taught transformation, and the Valley of Echoes had taught reflection. Now, facing open lands and uncertain paths, Brock understood that the future demanded adaptability, foresight, and the subtle alignment of action with principle. The day was calm, the sun climbing higher and casting gentle warmth across the plains. Brock led the group with careful attention, moving at a pace that balanced progress with mindfulness. Small streams and scattered groves punctuated the landscape, providing opportunities for rest and observation. Each pause, each deliberate step, reinforced the lessons he had internalized: patience, presence, and careful guidance. As they walked, Brock observed the movement of wildlife around them. Small Pokémon scuttled through the grass, birds wheeled across the sky, and distant shapes hinted at larger creatures navigating the plains. He marveled at the harmony of the ecosystem, each being, each action, each ripple of sound or motion contributing to the subtle order of life. The horizon itself seemed to shift as the day progressed, revealing hills, valleys, and forests that had remained hidden from view. Brock's mind reflected on the nature of the journey. The unknown was not simply a space to be crossed, but a teacher in its own right. It demanded awareness, patience, and the humility to recognize that one could not control all variables, only respond with care and attention. By midday, they reached a small plateau overlooking a river that curved gracefully across the plains. Brock knelt by the water's edge, letting his fingers skim the surface. The cool current mirrored the sky, clouds drifting above and distant shadows stretching across the banks. The river, moving quietly yet persistently, reminded him of the continuum of life: forward motion, persistence, and quiet transformation. He observed Ash and Misty engaging with the landscape. Ash's curiosity was boundless, his energy a source of vitality, while Misty's attentiveness and measured movements reflected a deepening understanding of balance and patience. Brock allowed them the freedom to explore, guiding subtly, intervening only when necessary, embodying the principle that true leadership required neither force nor domination, but presence, awareness, and subtle influence. The journey continued into the afternoon, the sun lowering gently, casting long shadows across the plains. Brock noted the subtle variations in terrain, the faint undulations in the wind, and the distant movements of wild Pokémon. Each detail held significance. Each observation reinforced the principles of care and attentiveness that he had cultivated. As evening approached, the group reached a gentle rise overlooking a vast expanse of rolling land, punctuated by forests and rivers that shimmered in the fading light. Brock paused, allowing the moment to settle upon him. The horizon beyond was both inviting and humbling, a reminder that the journey was ongoing, that learning never ceased, and that guidance was a responsibility carried not for recognition, but for the continuity of care and understanding. He opened his notebook, pen moving slowly, deliberately. The horizon beyond reminds us that the journey is infinite. Every step, every choice, every quiet moment of observation contributes to the path. To guide is to honor the unknown, to move with awareness, and to harmonize with the flow of life. Night fell gently over the plains, and stars emerged with quiet brilliance, reflecting faintly on distant rivers and shadowed valleys. Brock guided the group to a sheltered grove for the night, arranging a small fire whose warmth was gentle and comforting. The embers glowed softly, mirroring the distant constellations above. He allowed himself a moment of reflection, contemplating the lessons learned, the challenges overcome, and the path that still stretched endlessly ahead. Mountains, rivers, fire, and echoes had shaped him. And now the horizon beyond called him toward new experiences, new wisdom, and the continued cultivation of balance, patience, and empathy. The group settled for rest, Ash and Pikachu nearby, Misty adjusting her blanket, all enveloped in the soft glow of the fire and the tranquil rhythm of the evening. Brock observed them with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that the subtle influence of guidance, care, and presence had fostered trust and understanding. He reflected on the continuity of learning, the necessity of humility, and the beauty of shared experience. The horizon beyond was not a destination but a promise, a reminder that the path of growth was endless and that the essence of guidance lay in the delicate balance between awareness, action, and empathy. Brock wrote one final note before resting, words flowing slowly and deliberately onto the page. To face the horizon beyond is to embrace uncertainty with calm. Strength, patience, and wisdom guide the journey, but humility and awareness ensure its harmony. Every step, every observation, every act of care echoes forward into the infinite path ahead. As the fire dwindled to embers and the stars shimmered with quiet certainty, Brock lay back on the soft grass, feeling the pulse of the land beneath him and the subtle rhythm of life all around. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, letting the expansive horizon settle within him, and allowed himself to drift into rest, steady, attuned, and fully present. The night was infinite, the horizon eternal, and Brock, the traveler, the guide, the quiet teacher, slept beneath the stars, carrying the lessons of mountains, rivers, valleys, and echoes into the journey yet to come. Morning arrived with a gentle chill, carrying the scent of distant forests and the faint salt of unseen seas. Brock rose quietly, stretching and centering himself in the rhythm of the new day. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of plains, hills, and scattered trees. But today's path would lead them to a ridge notorious among travelers for its relentless winds, the whispering winds. The first steps toward the ridge brought a subtle change in the air. A faint breeze stirred the grass at their feet, carrying with it a delicate chorus of rustling leaves and distant echoes. Brock inhaled deeply, recognizing the voice of the wind as both challenge and guide. The wind could obstruct, it could soothe, and it could reveal, if one moved with awareness rather than resistance. Ash led the way, excitement and curiosity mingling in his movements, while Pikachu trotted close, ears flicking against the breeze. Misty followed, vigilant and measured, her gaze tracking the subtle shifts in the terrain and the airflow. Brock remained slightly behind, observing and attuning himself to the forces around them. He understood that leadership here required subtlety, to guide without obstruction, to support without controlling. The climb to the ridge was gradual, but the wind increased steadily, gathering strength as the landscape opened to the heights. Brock noticed how even small gestures were amplified. A misplaced step could be unbalanced by a gust. A leaf falling could distract a wandering gaze. He reminded himself that the wind, like life's challenges, demanded presence, patience, and adaptability. They paused on a narrow ledge overlooking the vast plains below. The wind carried faint echoes, soft voices intertwined with the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of birds, and the subtle hiss of moving grass. Brock recognized the valley's lesson mirrored here. The external environment reflected inner states. Calm acceptance could turn the wind into a stater of Dappet, guide. resistance could make it a formidable obstacle. Brock began to walk deliberately along the ridge, feeling the force of the wind against his body. Each step required attention, balance, and coordination. The wind tugged at his clothing, whistled softly around his ears, and teased the edges of his notebook, reminding him of the fragility inherent in every moment. Yet, he moved steadily, demonstrating the principle that progress is achieved not by overpowering obstacles, but by moving in harmony with them. Ash struggled briefly against the gusts, leaning into the wind, his energy undiminished yet unchecked. Brock adjusted subtly, a hand raised to guide without touching, a quiet presence that reinforced balance. Misty mirrored his steadiness, her movements precise, controlled, and graceful, embodying the lessons he had imparted over their long journey. The wind carried with it a soft chorus, almost musical, and Brock recognized the deeper rhythm hidden within. It spoke of persistence and change, of impermanence and the constant flow of energy. Each gust, each whisper, each tug against the path reminded him that strength alone was insufficient. Adaptability and awareness were equally vital. They followed the ridge for hours, the wind shaping their journey. Brock noted how each step forward required not only physical balance, but mental focus. The air itself seemed alive, responding to intention, and he felt the quiet satisfaction of moving in alignment with forces larger than himself. This was the ultimate lesson of the Whispering Winds. Harmony with challenge is the truest form of strength. Midday arrived, and the sun warmed their faces despite the persistent gusts. Brock paused near a protruding rock, letting the wind pass over him while observing the landscape. The plains below stretched endlessly, dotted with rivers, forests, and distant hills. The ridge itself, battered yet unbroken, mirrored the resilience required to traverse both mountains and life itself. He opened his notebook, pen moving slowly against the paper, capturing the essence of the lesson. The wind teaches resilience and adaptability. Strength alone cannot overcome its force. Understanding and harmony guide each step. To move with life is to bend without breaking, to flow without surrendering purpose. Ash and Misty observed quietly, each internalizing the lesson in their own way. Ash's exuberance was tempered by awareness, while Misty's precision found grace in the unpredictable flow of air. Brock allowed them space, knowing that guidance was most profound when it could be absorbed through observation, experience, and reflection. As afternoon waned, the winds grew more playful, tugging at their packs, teasing hair and clothing, yet never threatening beyond challenge. Brock noticed how the environment encouraged subtle adjustments. Each small movement, each calculated step, each mindful breath shaped their trajectory. Life, like the wind, required flexibility, attentiveness, and respect for the forces beyond one's control. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the ridge and painting the plains in hues of gold and lavender. Brock guided the group to a sheltered nook, a small depression shielded from the strongest gusts. Here, the wind was a soft murmur rather than a formidable force, offering comfort and a place to rest. The evening unfolded with serene beauty. Brock tended a modest fire, its warmth a gentle counterpoint to the cool breeze. Shadows danced along the ridge, mingling with the glow of embers and the faint glimmer of stars emerging overhead. The wind continued its whispers, a constant companion and teacher, carrying subtle hints of the world beyond. Unseen forests, distant rivers, and hidden valleys waiting to reveal their secrets. Brock reflected on the lessons of the journey so far. Mountains for endurance, rivers for patience, valleys for reflection, horizons for perspective, and now, wind for adaptability. Each element shaped not only the traveler, but also the teacher. A reminder that guidance required alignment with both internal and external forces. A steady heart and attentive mind. He picked up his notebook one final time for the day. The Whispering Winds teach the art of balance. To resist is to falter. To yield blindly is to surrender. Harmony with life's currents allows strength to flow, resilience to endure, and guidance to flourish. The fire settled into glowing embers, and the first stars shimmered with quiet certainty above. Brock lay back on the soft ground, the wind playing gently across his face, carrying with it a sense of continuity, movement, and presence. He felt the lessons of the day settle into his being, the subtle interplay of force and grace, challenge and acceptance, presence and observation. The winds, ever present and ever shifting, reminded him that life was not a static path, but a dynamic journey, requiring attentiveness, adaptability, and steady resolve. Ash and Misty slept nearby, their breathing even and calm, while Pikachu nestled close, undisturbed by the gentle gusts. Brock allowed himself a moment of gratitude for their trust, for the journey, and for the quiet teachings embedded in every step, every stone, every whisper of air. As the night deepened, the wind softened into a gentle murmur, carrying the echoes of unseen valleys and distant peaks. Brock closed his eyes, breathing slowly, attuned to the rhythm of the world, aligned with its flow, and fully present in the moment. The ridge stood resilient beneath the vast night sky, the wind whispering its eternal lessons, and Brock, steady, patient, and contemplative, drifted into sleep, ready to continue the journey that stretched endlessly toward the horizon beyond. The dawn of the final day broke gently, spilling pale gold light across the windswept ridge. Brock rose slowly, stretching, grounding himself in the rhythm of the world around him. Today, the summit awaited. The culmination of mountains crossed, rivers followed, valleys reflected upon, horizons embraced, and winds understood. The path ahead was clear yet demanding, a silent invitation to integrate all lessons into presence and understanding. Ash and Misty were already awake, their movements subdued in the stillness of morning. Pikachu stirred beside Ash, small eyes blinking in the soft light. Brock observed them, noting the quiet anticipation and the subtle tension that accompanies the final approach. The summit was more than a physical destination. It was a place of reflection, insight, and profound understanding. The climb began with careful steps along the ridge, each stone and tuft of grass reminding them of the endurance and attentiveness required to move steadily. The wind whispered softly, carrying echoes from distant peaks and valleys below. Brock inhaled deeply, feeling the connection between earth, air, and sky, and recognizing the profound continuity of all things. As they ascended, Brock observed the terrain carefully. Loose stones, narrow ledges, and steep inclines demanded attention, yet he moved with a calm awareness that influenced the group subtly. Ash's eagerness surged occasionally, tempered by Brock's presence, while Misty's measured pace embodied a quiet harmony between caution and determination. Brock remained the quiet center, guiding not by force, but by example, patience, and attention. The sun climbed higher, illuminating distant ridges and valleys, painting the world in hues of amber, gold, and soft violet. Brock paused occasionally to observe the landscape, letting his eyes wander across the vast expanse. Mountains, rivers, valleys, horizons, and winds had all imparted lessons, and now the summit offered the final opportunity to integrate them. They reached a plateau just below the peak, a place where the wind sang softly and the world stretched infinitely in every direction. Brock knelt beside a smooth stone, tracing its surface, feeling the history embedded in its texture. He reflected on the journey. The mountains for endurance, the rivers for flow, the valleys for reflection, the horizons for perspective, and the winds for adaptability. Each element had shaped not only the traveler, but also the guide within him. Ash and Misty lingered nearby, taking in the expansive view, observing distant forests, rivers, and peaks. Pikachu nestled close, ears flicking at the soft sounds of the wind. Brock allowed them the quiet moment, knowing that contemplation and presence were as vital as the physical ascent. The final steps toward the summit were deliberate, slow, and mindful. Each footfall was a meditation, each breath a rhythm aligned with the world. The climb itself became an expression of all that had been learned: patience, balance, awareness, and the quiet strength of presence. As they reached the peak, the world unfolded beneath them in an endless panorama. Valleys, rivers, forests, and distant mountains stretched to the horizon. The wind, now gentle, carried the faint scent of earth and stone, whispering lessons only perceptive hearts could hear. Brock stood, feeling the culmination of the journey within him. He observed Ash, who gazed with wide-eyed wonder, and Misty, whose calm reflection mirrored the serenity of the peak. Brock recognized that the summit was not merely a physical achievement, but a space of integration, a place where lessons converged, where understanding deepened, and where the quiet power of presence was revealed. Brock opened his notebook one final time, pen moving deliberately. The summit is not an end, but a convergence of lessons. Mountains teach endurance, rivers teach flow, valleys teach reflection, horizons teach perspective, and winds teach adaptability. To stand at the peak is to recognize the harmony of these elements within oneself and with those we guide. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the peaks and bathing the landscape in warm, golden light. Brock felt the profound serenity of the moment, a quiet culmination of effort, learning, and awareness. Every challenge, every subtle guidance, every observation had contributed to the steady growth of both himself and those around him. He turned to observe Ash and Misty, noting the subtle changes within them. Ash's boundless energy tempered by reflection, Misty's careful analysis softened by experience, Pikachu's quiet contentment nestled beside them. Brock understood that guidance was not a matter of authority, but of alignment, helping others navigate their own paths, while maintaining the steady presence of understanding and care. As night approached, stars began to emerge, mirrored faintly in the distant rivers and valleys. Brock led the group to a small ledge where they could rest safely, building a modest fire whose warmth countered the chill of altitude. The flames flickered gently, casting soft light across the faces of his companions, blending with the first glimmers of starlight. Brock allowed himself a moment of reflection. The journey had been long, the lessons deep, and the growth profound. Mountains had tested endurance, rivers had taught patience, valleys had mirrored inner reflection, horizons had revealed perspective, and winds had fostered adaptability. Each challenge, each quiet intervention, each moment of observation had been part of the continuous process of understanding. He wrote a final note in his notebook, words flowing with calm certainty. The summit reveals that the journey itself is the teacher. Strength, patience, insight, and adaptability converge here. To guide is to harmonize with the world, to move with awareness, and to nurture growth without imposing upon it. The lessons of the journey live within each step, each breath, and each quiet moment of presence. The night deepened, stars shimmering with quiet brilliance above. Brock lay back on the stone, feeling the pulse of the world beneath him, the rhythm of life in wind, river, and earth. He breathed deeply, attuning himself to the infinite patterns of existence, the harmony of movement and stillness, of effort and acceptance. Ash and Misty slept nearby, Pikachu nestled in warmth, the fire casting flickering shadows across the ridge. Brock allowed the stillness to settle into him, letting the culmination of all lessons integrate seamlessly into his being. He was traveler, guide, observer, and learner, a quiet presence attuned to the eternal rhythm of life. The summit stood silent and eternal, the night infinite, and Brock, steady, patient, and wholly present, drifted into sleep. In that moment, he understood the essence of the journey, that wisdom, guidance, and understanding are not destinations, but living currents, flowing continuously, shaping the world and those who move within it. The stars above, the wind around, and the land below bore witness to the quiet culmination of the path. Brock lay in harmony with all, carrying within him the profound lessons of mountains, rivers, valleys, horizons, and winds, lessons that would endure far beyond the journey itself. And beneath the vast, eternal sky, Brock slept, complete, serene, and aligned with the world, having reached not only the summit of the mountains, but the summit of understanding itself.